Good evening. Usually I say good morning, but I think it's not the right time. I would like to open this event tonight on behalf of Tel Aviv University and the so-called Yuval Ne'eman Workshop for Science, Technology, and Security. Security in Defense, as all of you know in Hebrew, security in defense is the same name. It's hard to translate. And this event is a little bit different from the events that we held regularly because this time we have two distinguished different nationality people coming here to Israel, one from Russia, the other one from India, working on and writing a book on a subject which I'm sure interests all of us. And of course, on top of them, we will have also Minister Ya'alon to give the Israeli view on the same subject. The first one is Professor Sergei Kurginyan, whom I know for some years, many years. I lost the count of it. Sergei Kurginyan is founder and president of independent Russian think tank, which deals with international public affairs, have a very peculiar name, ECC. It's Experimental Creative Center. I mean, the first time I met someone dealing with hard matter with such creativity. The center operates with a wide variety of international and internal Russian problems, and Dr. Kurginyan is regularly invited to advise the Russian policymakers on matters of national development and security. He is editor-in-chief of too many books, I mean, more books than I can describe today, and the number of articles he wrote, I think, is something like 1,000. All of us from the university who sit in the audience, including the former rector of Tel Aviv University, I don't think that we could match something like this. I mean, all of us together. His center runs several international programs, including the Russian-Israeli Seminar on Global Problems of the 21st Century. And I'm honored to have him here. The other co-author and speaker will be Mr. Vikram Sood, who is a career intelligence officer, like many of us here in the audience, former head of the research and analysis wing of the Indian External Intelligence, the parallel to our Mossad. Presently, Mr. Sood holds the position of deputy president of the leading Indian think tank, which is called Observer Research Foundation, ORF, and it is an influential independent center which had a say in a year on the, of the Indian government. He is also deputy head of the Center for International Affairs of this foundation, and Mr. Sood has also written a number of works on security issues of South Asia and Middle East. And the reason we are here today is that together with Sergei Kurginyan, they both co-edited a joint publication, which is this book here. We have the name behind me, Radical Islam, and which deals with a problem that we are all interested in. We all, I mean, Israel is perhaps, the way we see it is Israel is in the middle of an ocean, of Muslim hostile ocean around us. It's very interesting to hear that different countries which usually we don't think as threatened by the radicalization of the Islam, like Russia or India, also see the problem in very similar terms to the way we view it. I'm honored to have you both here, and I will now let Martin Sherman, who did almost everything here today, to lead the panel. Please, Martin.
Thank you, Itzik, and thank you. Thank you, Martin, for those outrageously flattering things that you said about me. Of course, Itzik Ben Israel is not a man to contradict, but I feel that I must give credit to him, and he said that I did nearly everything here. I must give credit for many other people who helped bring this event about. First of all, I'd like to thank Martin and Donna and Chaya and Martin Klein and his staff of the management of Sea and Sun. Of course, Itzik for his and his staff, Gili and Revital, for their kind cooperation, Sasha Libin and Andre as well from Sergei's team. These people were all very, very central in bringing the event about. Well, to start off, let me first of all recognize Vice Premier and Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ya'alon, the panel, and after this, offering thanks to so many people, I'm now going to do something which has probably put me on a very slippery slope. I would like to recognize some important figures in the audience here. Mr. Shabtai Shavit, the former head of Mossad, who has honored us with his presence. General Yaakov Amidro, and Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser. And if there's anyone I haven't mentioned and feels that I should have, I apologize most profusely. It's just because I didn't run into you during the buffet. This is an unusual and interesting evening for an Israeli audience. So I'd like to take a few words to set the context in a telegraphic and nutshell form. The truth of the matter is I only received a copy of this book yesterday, so I can't really give an authoritative assessment of it. But what I can give you is an outline of the far-reaching range of topics that it deals with. For instance, radical Islam in South Asia and its implications for the regional manageable chaos, the death for the sake of death, radical Islam in India, a nuclear bomb in the hands of radical Islamists, etc., etc., radical Islam and weapons of mass destruction, Iran and its opponents, Russia or Eurasia, radical Islam in Europe, the Western Islamism, radical Islam in India, etc., etc. So there's a wide range of topics dealt with here for people who are taking an interest in this crucial subject. But what I would like to do now is to establish the rationale for an evening like this in Israel. Normally, in Israel, the overwhelming emphasis on the conduct of Israel's foreign policy is on the North Atlantic region, focusing normally on the US, North America, and Europe. However, with the inevitable decline, or undeniable decline in the power and influence of the United States and Western Europe, attention in Israel is being turned, or at least one hopes it's being turned, elsewhere. Two of the emerging new foci of attention should undoubtedly be Russia and India. It's therefore, I think, appropriate to spend a little time to shed some light on the significance of Indo-Israeli and Russo-Israeli relationships, at least since the end of the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, which was a watershed in the relationship between the two countries, which up until then had been rather rocky and adversarial. let's start off with the Indian relationship. For those who place significance or importance on the symbolic, it will be undoubtedly of some significance that the way you write Indian in Hebrew is almost identical to the way you write Jew. So that's something that always brings a smile to my Indian colleagues. But probably on a more substantive level, if we look at the aspirations of modern India, one of the Indian founding fathers, Nehru's successor, Lal Bahadur, coined the phrase, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. In other words, honor the warrior and honor the farmer. Sometime later, the previous Prime Minister of India, Atal Vajpayee, added an additional element, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, and Jai Vidyan. Honor the warrior, honor the farmer, and honor science, which I think parallels very much the kind of endeavor which typifies Israeli endeavor as well. So we see a parallel between the aspirations of modern India and the achievements of modern Israel. Sorry. The relationship between India and Israel has burgeoned over the last 2 decades. Trade between the two countries has increased from about $200,000 before the establishment of relations to almost $5 billion at the moment. As far as the arms trade goes, India is Israel's biggest market for arms, and up until recently, at least according to some reports, was India's biggest supplier of arms, competing with Russia. And why I say up until recently, because yesterday, if you followed the news, a massive agreement was signed by Russia with India, with Medvedev, for $30 billion, which, by the way, may open further opportunities for Israel, for Israeli avionics in Russian platforms, but that's still down the line. But Israeli presence in India has a very high profile, and you've probably all heard the old joke, and I apologize for those who haven't. I'll just tell it for the insignificant minority who haven't. The Indian citizen who stops the Israeli backpacker in New Delhi and says, well, tell me, how many Israelis are there? And he says, well, I don't know, about 5 million. He says, no, not in New Delhi, everywhere. So that just gives you some idea of the high-profile footprint that Israelis have in India. Moving on to the Russian relationship. Well, Zionism is imbued with Russian influence. It's almost impossible to separate the Zionist ethos from its Russian roots. In literature, poetry, theater, music, we have here some iconic figures of Russia. You have Shai Agnon, Bialik, Ben Yehuda, Shlonsky, Brennel, Chagall, Khada'am. All of these people come from within the confines of what was once the Russian Empire. So Zionism has been saturated with the Russian influence. And it's almost impossible to imagine modern-day Israel without the massive immigration from the former Soviet Union. Some estimates say that 1 in 5 Israelis comes from the former Soviet Union. And as I say, it would be impossible to imagine the modern-day Israel without the contribution of Russian-speaking immigrants in science, industry, culture, music, and military, where according to some reports, 1/3 of the combat troops are from Soviet origin. Moving on to Islam and terror. It was Samuel Huntington from Harvard University who in 1993 wrote his famous article on the clash of civilizations, who focused on the animosity between Muslims and the rest of the world. Violence occurs between Muslims on the one hand and Orthodox Serbs in the Balkans, Jews in Israel, Hindus in India, Buddhists in Burma, Catholics in Philippines, and ends with a very dire sentence saying, Islam has bloody borders. Now, Professor Ben Israel mentioned before that we in Israel have the impression, live under the impression that we are the epicenter of Islamic animosity. But we must remember that there is much blood at the interface with Islam and other nations in predominantly non-Muslim societies. It's therefore of great value to share the perspective from other nations seen through the eyes of well-informed and authoritative experts on the nature of the Islamic threat in their countries, a threat which is emerging as an increasingly severe menace across much of the non-Muslim world, and by the way, much of the Muslim world as well. As you can see, I've just made a short list, very quickly, of some of the non-state actors that are actively challenging sovereign governments across the world, whether Muslim or non-Muslim. And if you look at their geographic spread, you can see that they are spread almost from the Atlantic Ocean through the Hindu Kush, through Indonesia and up to the Philippines. So that is sort of a very, very rapid survey of the threat of Islam across the world, excluding the Israeli experience. Now, Islam and terror in India. Well, Islamic terror in India, according to conventional wisdom, is sourced in Pakistan. And we as Israelis remember, of course, the 2001 attack on the Indian Parliament, the horrific attack on the Taj Mahal and the Chabad Center in Mumbai in 2008. And recently we've heard of a new organization called the Indian Mujahideen, who's apparently a cover for older organizations. But just to get a flavor of the thought of these organizations, here's from Lashkar al-Taiba, the people who perpetrated the Mumbai attack. The world of non-believers is united against Islam. This collaboration will prove to be the final destruction of all anti-Muslim elements, Jews, Crusaders, and Hindu Brahmins, who die with their own trap. Islam will be the sole dominating force in the world. So that is the kind of ideology that's emanating from the radical threat of Islam in India. If we look at the Russian scene, here, according to conventional wisdom, the threat is sourced out of the Caucasus, from Chechnya, from Dagestan, places like that. We remember the horrific results of Islamic terror in Russia, in the Beslan school attack, the Russian subways, the use of female suicide bombers, etc., etc. And there was a recent Hudson Institute research on this, and there's just a few quotes that I think are appropriate here. Russia's long encounter with Islam is an example to the West. Even after 100 years of being settled, Muslims still want an Islamic state, and like Pakistan, cannot live under civil rule without demanding all others follow their religious laws, and ultimately they should be given their own state. It shows us that there's a need to worry about Muslim immigration to the West, and I've just spent a year in the United States, and believe me, they do not understand the threat. Russia's Islamic radicalism will be spread. Within the Caucasus, that has already infected Dagestanis, who occupy strategic territory between Azerbaijan and the Caspian Sea, the Tatars, the Bashkirs in the middle Volga region, etc., etc. These are making unprecedented claims for autonomy within Russia, sometimes for full independence. Islamic clerics are speaking out boldly in ways that challenge Moscow directly. So this was just a brief tour de force of what I thought would be important to say, why we're having this evening, why there should be an evening of Russian and Indian perspectives on terror, and give you a brief glimpse of what is going on in these countries. Now, just one more slide. This you can see is a summary of some of the terror attacks in Russia, And you can see, compared to Israeli incidences, the death tolls here are horrific, well over 100, sometimes up to 300. So this is the kind of assault Islamic terror is conducting against Russia. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to our honored speakers. We didn't discuss who was going to speak first, but perhaps I could invite you, Sergei, to speak first. Sergei Kourganyan is someone I've known since 9/11, by the way. We met through 9/11, where Mr. Kourganyan thought it would be a good idea to make contacts with Israel because of Israeli expertise in dealing with terror. And since then, we've had a firm friendship. We have not always agreed, but we've always respected each other's positions. Professor Kourganyan is a man of great passion, with very, very creative ideas. And to his credit, I must say, the first person I ever heard mention Pakistan as an epicenter of terror was from Professor Kourganyan in Moscow in 2001. Before that was on anyone's map.
Let me thank all of you, all who came here tonight. Let me thank the organizers of this event. I understand it was a very difficult work to organize it, and they did it wonderfully. And I would like also to thank all those whom I know and who are present here today. Mr. Yalon, whom I know for a long time, Mr. Supervisor, Mr. Midror, and all of you, all of those who came here today. During the last 10 or even 11 years, we convene here to discuss strategic programs, and Mr. Sherman plays a vital role in those meetings. He has this strong internal drive and confidence that those questions should be discussed, and I always admire him for that and for his intellectual abilities. We also are grateful to everyone who is here, and we're especially grateful to our Indian friends, Mr. Vikram Sood, and to the Observer Research Foundation in general, which we have very good relations with. And this book, Perspectives from India and Russia, Perspectives on Radical Islam, was published in Russian about half a year ago, and recently it was also published in English, and we immediately managed to establish a very good relationship. And we also managed to establish a very good relationship swiftly. And in this book, together, our Indian colleagues and Russian scholars spoke about a certain range of problems. And as I always thought, sooner or later, we must create an encyclopedia of radical Islam. An encyclopedia in the meaning that was used in France during the French Enlightenment, meaning the full understanding of the subject by experts from different countries in order to understand the weak and strong sides of this phenomena and how to fight it and how this phenomena behaves in the 21st century. And I think that such an intellectual endeavor can help us to resolve many problems, and it will also create a mutual methodological language to describe this phenomenon. We cannot treat the radical Islam as a thing in itself, using the words of Immanuel Kant. We cannot describe this phenomena without its global context, and only together having done this intellectual work, we can go further and win. Some will tell me that studying phenomena is one thing and fighting it something else, but I will quote Roger Bacon, who told us that knowledge is a power in itself. But it is not even important whether it is so or not, but knowledge creates language, language creates a discourse, while discourse creates structures. And when those structures will claim that their goal is a strategic struggle and they have enough opportunities to wage the strategic struggle, they will prevail. Today, this struggle, the ways of fighting radical Islam is quite, is what worries me. I'll try to use a metaphor. As of today, I saw a lot of times when the scholars of radical Islam study this problem as certain rocks which are on the ground. So there's a big rock, smaller rocks, one of them is round, the other is square. Another rock has more premium in it or some other elements, but no one asks where this rock came from the ceiling. But maybe there's another ceiling, and there is a hole in the first ceiling, and through those holes the rocks fall on the ground. And maybe there is a third ceiling, even higher up. And when people don't want to look at those ceilings from where the rocks fall, but the desire to look at the rocks is quite unfortunate. I call it a positivist neurosis, when people view certain phenomena but don't want to discuss how these phenomena came into being. And to understand this is very important politically. Maybe this intellectual and political discourse is different from the academic discourse. And I believe that the problem of radical Islam today cannot be described or viewed as an academic problem per se. If we will deal with it only academically and lose our intellectual and political and our systemic view, then the radical Islam will prevail and will fall on our heads all the time. We always tell our friends that this rock fell from somewhere. It is here on the ground, but it fell from somewhere. Maybe it was even damaged when it fell, but we are told that it doesn't matter where it came from. It is important what are the characteristics of it. Yes, it is important. What then? When I speak about those ceilings, and I try to juxtapose this positivism, the Kantian positivism, the transcendental view of Hegel and others, I speak about the most important problems of the 21st century. The world is no longer a global or regional world. The world is now local, meaning that it is global and local at the same time. And in every point, in each point here in this room, in the state of Israel, we can see all the global problems together, how they come into being in certain countries, certain region, and we cannot disregard those global problems, because in this case we lose our weapon. Maybe we can resolve different local problems of some country, a bigger or smaller country, but if the global problems are not dealt with, this country will be in a catastrophic or in critical situation, and if it was able to resolve its own problems, will not undo the other global problems. What do I mean by that? First of all, today the radical Islamic phenomena does not have a clear definition. What is Islamism? What is the degree of radicalism that we judge it by? 50% radicalism, 70% radicalism, where we should draw the line. When we speak about the Wahhabism, and we understand that Wahhabism is one of the types of the Islam, you know, there is a book by Bukhari about the Protestants in Islam. Then there is another word, the Salafism. But what does that mean? So what is the global problem that only speaking about it and studying it we can understand the phenomenon of the radical Islam? The global problem is as follows. During the last 500 years, 250 years, the world is moving toward the paradigm called modernity or moderna. This is a world which is built in a certain way, and we speak here in a Zionist country. We know that Zionism is the Jewish modernism, the Jewish modernity, the understanding of the nation as a being, different relations between the religion and the state. It all came into being during the French Revolution, but it all started even before that. I do not want to dwell on those problems too deeply, but when the conflict between religion and nationality came into being, from that minute the world should have taken the modernity and use it. I know that in India there is an Indian nation which has a lot of small groups, different religions, and this is the modern world which goes toward progress, humanism, and our modern way of life. The idea is that the radical Islam principally denies any elements of this modern world. Only radical Islam and only Islam is, maybe other fascist groups are too small and too weak, but only Islam says that it doesn't want to go to this modern world. We have other counter-modern medieval world. We want this world, so we will destruct your modern world. And Bin Laden, whom we can see here, when you read his texts, that's what he says: we shall destruct the contemporary world. We throw a challenge to the contemporary world. So there is one world, the modern world, the other world, which we can see here. And our goal is not to understand what is the degree of radicalism, but to give it a proper name. Confucius used to say that everything starts from giving right names to things. So let us call this phenomena counter-modernity. This is an important part of the contemporary world. There is also a third element, the postmodern world, part of Europe, which now has a very strange relationship with radical Islam. Different forces in the West want to play with these radical Islamic forces. We in Russia believe that for us, the danger is what is called the Brzezinski paradigm, the paradigm which means that there can be an alliance between the West and the radical Islam. Mr. Brzezinski spoke about it and wrote about it in his books, spoke about the importance of this alliance. And this postmodernism, which destructs morality, destructs family, and throws challenge to all those elements of modernity, of social modernity, and try to disregard the morality and to infuse the relativism in the moral ideas, also is a threat to the modernity. Those postmodern and countermodern phenomena coexist, and postmodernism maybe thinks that it will be part of the future world order, what Mao Zedong used to call the global city or global village. We today are at a certain stage when the world is changing its format, and this ceiling that I spoke about, from where those rocks fell on our heads, is the ceiling of world problems, and we cannot escape it. But it is not everything. When we speak to people about the global problems today, you sometimes hear these politically correct statements. You ask, who needs chaos? Who needs chaos in the current world? And the answer that is given is nobody needs chaos. Nobody needs chaos in the Middle East. Who needs chaos in Asia? Nobody needs it. But it is quite clear that it is not so. The enemy needs chaos. If the enemy wages war against you, it must disorient you. It must create chaos in your midst. Also, those financial wars and energy wars which are waged today also need chaos. We know that it can bring about the decrease in the oil prices, and during the oil wars, the conflicts between different groups are organized. But this is even more dangerous phenomena is the terrorism based on drugs. The drug barons need chaos. Today, the drug barons obtain about $1 trillion per year. They need chaos. Nowhere in the world drugs influence in itself. We see that the conflict has a very high price. In the places of conflict, there is a lot of weapons needed, and so we can see that there is a conglomerate, a consortium between the terrorists, the drug dealers, and the weapon dealers. All of them are also interested in chaos. And there is another phenomenon, the strategic chaos. I'm a mathematician, so when I read in political works about the world disorder, not world order, but the world disorder, I now read a lot about fractals and about managed chaos. I understand that chaos is required, chaos is needed as an instrument of building the world, because it became quite clear that the world order cannot be achieved. You need too many troops. You need maybe deploy troops in Pakistan or in Iran, and you must become Rome. You must send your legions everywhere, and you must offer the Pax Romana. But what happens if we have now a very strange idea that maybe the world can be managed not as Rome managed it, but as Carthago managed it, managed through chaos. I read books by Stephen Mann, an important American scholar, who describes those models. If those models will come into being, the radical Islam has a huge potential, because in that case it becomes an instrument of the world disorder, world chaos. And if someone needs this chaos, then this radical Islam is a commodity that everyone will be willing to buy. Then the radical Islam is not a thing in itself. It is not just bad guys like bin Laden. It is a force that is needed by other countries. You know that once it was used against the Soviet Union, before that it had been used against the Russian Empire or against the Ottoman Empire. Who told that it will not be used again against someone? In this meaning, we must understand that the most dangerous thing is when the radical Islam is bought by someone, is acquired by someone. If it again acquired a master who bought it, because this master will have to pay for using the radical Islam. Once its relationship with its old client went sour, but now it will have to pay, and it will have to pay by countries, by the states that the radical Islam doesn't like. And I think this is the danger which cannot be overstated, and we all must view the phenomena in a more complex way. I believe that if we all will judge and see this phenomena on a more deep level, if we will not create only knowledge, but will create a mutual intellectual and political language and discourse and structures, and that if we will unite on the basis of those structures, then we will be able to prevail over this horrible threat. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergei, for that energetic and impassioned presentation. Our next speaker is Mr. Vikram Sood. As stated before, Mr. Vikram Sood was the head of the Indian External Intelligence Agency, RAW. I haven't had the pleasure of meeting him before, although I have met his iconic predecessor, Mr. Kao. Mr. Vikram Sood, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for Your Excellency, Vice Premier, my co-panelists, Dr. Martin, Sherman. I have a problem. Can I put it back here? Is it, can you hear me? Okay. All my life I was paid to keep quiet. And suddenly, last few months, I have started to speak. I'm not like Sergei who does one show every day. I'd have done 2 in 6 months. So, well, they actually, I'm so grateful, I'm so happy to be here amongst you today in your great country. This was possible because Sergei thought of this book. We worked on it together and we organized a joint publication, and he's already introduced the book to you. The book gives the Indian perspective as well as the Russian perspective, and it's not about Islam, it's about radical Islam and its effects. Sergei has given us a philosophical, ideological discourse. Mine is more a practitioner's approach, the effect of radical terrorism, the threats it creates and the problems that have arisen because of that. I know I have my good friends in the audience, and like good friends, I'm sure they're going to say a few things afterwards. Please do it afterwards. But anyhow, both India and Israel are two countries at the end of, geographically at the end of what in between is an unstable, radicalized, partly nuclearized, partly going to be nuclearized mass. And it's a threat to us in the neighborhood. It's a threat to Israel. It's a threat to the world. So what I'm going to talk about essentially is how our neighbor, Pakistan, has radicalized over the last 60 years, and the effect it has had on us, the effect it has had on Afghanistan, the effect it is beginning to have on itself. Because the mindset that has been created in Pakistan with this steady radicalization over the last 60 years has now become so ingrained that it is now becoming a threat to themselves, and they don't know how to handle it. Or maybe they don't want to handle it, but one presumes that they don't know how to handle it. It started off, let me give you a little snapshot of the Pakistani incremental Islamization. It started off right in the beginning, actually, in 1947, when they first used terror as a weapon of foreign policy, when they tried to grab Kashmir on the basis of the two-nation theory. That failed. They had a weak polity in their country, unlike ours, and quickly the feudal bureaucratic setup gave way to the military. And the military was never shy of using Islam to stay in power, to rationalize its stay. They fought again in 65. Again, the same principle was used. They sent in raiders and insurgents and terrorists. That too failed. 71 came the Bangladesh liberation. Pakistan split into two. So the two-nation theory became that much weaker. On the other hand, they needed to strengthen the two-nation theory. Therefore, the campaign on Kashmir had to be reignited. People say that Pakistan became two nations because they believed in two nations. So they got two nations, India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. We believed in one nation and we are still together. So, well, that's a bit of a facetious remark. Anyhow, having started off on that route, when they lost the 71 war and they split, revenge was the motive thereafter. And the opportunity came during the Afghan jihad of the 80s. When Pakistan Islamized rapidly, it began to nuclearize. The United States looked the other way because it needed Pakistani assistance to carry on the campaign, at the end of which Pakistan became Islamized. The military had recruits who were only if they fulfilled the Islamic tenets. The school's curriculum was changed. The madrasas had become recruiting grounds. So the 90s were the years when we felt we had the brunt of Pakistan-sponsored terror in my country. New organizations floated by the Pakistani generals, like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, which Dr. Martin mentioned, were at the forefront of their campaign in India. And they are Punjabi organizations, they were not Kashmiri organizations. They were born in Lahore, they recruited Punjabis, they sent in Punjabi jihadi foot soldiers into India. The last phase began in 2001 after 9/11, when forced to handle. Oh, I must mention that during the 90s, Osama bin Laden had taken shelter in Afghanistan, and he had organized the International Islamic Front for Jihad, in which a number of Pakistani organizations were members. And the International Islamic Front for Jihad was against crusaders, as Osama called them, the Jews, and later we were also added to for honorable mention in that list. So we have Al-Qaeda there. Pakistani sponsored the Taliban in the 90s to keep control on Afghanistan. After September 11, 2001, the Americans called them to task. And since then, they have played the Americans in many different ways. They have themselves divided the entire operation in 3 or 4 categories. One is they help as much as they can. They help the Americans as much as they can to take hold of or to arrest or to capture Al-Qaeda, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and Abu Zubaydah were captured from Pakistan, from Karachi and Faisalabad, another industrial town in Punjab. However, that's one group. The other is the Afghan Quetta Shura of the Taliban, where Mullah Umar is believed to be, controlling Kandahar and southern Afghanistan. The Pakistanis don't touch them. They're kept safe for the future. The one that hurts them the most is the new phenomenon of the Taliban, which exists in FATA, northwest frontier of Pakistan. These are the ones who've been campaigning against Pakistan, and they are the ones that they want to take action against. The India-specific groups, like the Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and so many others, are left untouched. So our reckoning is the Pakistanis would first tackle the Pakistani Taliban, then Al-Qaeda, then Afghan Shura, and but I don't think that will ever happen, tackle the India-specific terrorist groups. So India is going to be facing this problem for God knows how long. Pakistan has, as I said, nuclearized. Their education system has shifted towards Islamic and jihadi tenets. They teach jihad to their small children in school. They teach them hatred. And that's in the mainstream schools. So if you have that curriculum, if you have the madrasa recruits in the northwest frontier province who have been providing the foot soldiers, if you have mainstream schools and if you have people from the army who have been Islamized, a process which started 30 years ago, or 25 years ago, we feel that many of those who were recruited then are now in the corridors of power in Pakistan. So there is a fundamentalist mindset in the ruling circles of Pakistan. At the same time, the civil society is not strong enough to condemn them. The political apparatus is weak. The only thing we have is the army, which is strong, which is to our minds radicalized greatly. It is equipped with nuclear weapons. So our problem is today, it's current. And we do not know when it will flare up again. Possibly in the future, when the United States leaves Afghanistan, which I'm sure it will one day, substantially or not, the menace will spread. It will take over Afghanistan. It will threaten the Central Asian republics. It will threaten Russia. One sees that Islamization is taking its toll even in Europe. For Europe, the problem has been how to amalgamate this new phenomenon into their mainstream society. It is not going to be easy. For us, with our 180 million Muslims, our challenge is how to keep the amalgam, how to keep the country together and prevent it from getting Islamized. But in this day and age, I would be dishonest if I didn't say that there are some fringe elements even in my country who believe that the only way they can solve their problems are through violence. So we have that problem within. We have a problem from our neighborhood. And we have a problem that is spreading all over. We know that Israel is concerned about what direction Iran will take, and justifiably so. Therefore, we have to be able to tackle these problems jointly in a manner that does not lead to more violence. Some of you may have read Robert Kaplan's, I'm sure you must have read it, Revenge of Geography. And Colonel Roberts' piece called The Blood Borders. Kaplan talks about how geography determines nations. And his thesis, as I understood it, means that some lines have to be redrawn. Some boundaries may need to be redrawn. And he had the Middle East in mind, barring Israel. So did Roberts. When he wrote Blood Borders, he also drew an imaginary map of the Middle East, which showed a greater Afghanistan, a smaller Pakistan, a greater Balochistan, reconfigured Iran, and so on. I suppose these are just thoughts, but the fact that these are thoughts is also important, and we need to take notice of that. The other aspect is that very often we are told that we should go to the root cause to solve these problems. But I don't think terror can be solved by going through root causes. Any state that needs to tackle terror must get on top of the terror. Its will must run first. If it doesn't, terror will never subside. So I believe that if we have to control terror, the first thing is to suppress it. And then we go into to other aspects of looking after what they wanted, what the demands were. In our book we have talked about how Al Qaeda may use Pakistan as its beachhead for further Islamization of the world. Years ago, there was a map brought out by Omar Bakri Muhammad. He's a Syrian. I think I forget the name of his organization, but he was thrown out of United Kingdom. He had a map which showed parts of the globe in green, and that was essentially the Middle East and Pakistan and Bangladesh. Then 20 years later, he shows a map which shows Russia, parts of the Balkans, most of Africa as Islamic. By the end of the 21st century, he shows the entire world as green. Well, that's a thought. It's not that it's going to be real, but there are many who want to work for that. And that, if it is going to be Islamic and radical, that's the problem we all face. I don't have any solutions to offer, but I just thought I'll put this across to you. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening to me.
Our final speaker is one of, in my opinion, Israel's more clear-eyed politicians, and I won't embarrass him by telling him how much I agree with him, because that's not necessarily a good idea for a politician. But I would like to invite to the podium Lieutenant General Reserve Moshe Boge Ya'alon, former head of military intelligence, former chief of staff of the IDF, and today Vice Premier of Israel and Minister for Strategic Affairs. And what could be more strategic than radical Islam?
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, many distinguished guests. I would like, first of all, to thank you, Dr. Sergei Kurginyan and Mr. Vikram Sood, for sharing with us your wisdom and experience in your new book, which I had the privilege to get it 3 days ago, and I had the time to read it in the boring discussions in our parliament, in the Knesset. So thank you very much. As I found again and again that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not the epicenter for all the troubles of the world. Having said that, there are too many people, especially Western like-minded people, who believe in it. And I'm here to share with you the Israeli perspective as well as the Israeli experience regarding radical Islam and terror. The terror threat against the free world in general, and in Israel in particular, comes today mainly from two groups of radical Islamists who have a lot in common and occasionally cooperate with each other, but at the time have many differences and sometimes even confront each other bitterly. The Al-Qaeda group, on the one hand, and the Iran group, on the other hand, are both interested in changing the existing world order so that Islam and its values will have a dominant role in the new order. Both believe that terrorism is a legitimate and recommended way to promote this end and do not rule out the possibility of using unconventional weapons as a terror tool. Both regard Israel as an illegal entity and are committed to its annihilation, but consider the United States as an arch-enemy that has to be defeated for the vision to come true. Israel is only the minor Satan, America is a great Satan. But while Al-Qaeda and its affiliates and mutations focus their terror activities against Western targets, especially Americans, and against the pragmatic pro-Western regimes, the Iranian-led group focuses its terror especially against Israel. Although the Iranian-led group is dominantly Shiite, it does include radical Sunni groups like Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad because its focus is on Israel. Moreover, in areas where it is not in control or tries to have control, such as Afghanistan or Yemen, Iran and its supporters do not oppose the activities of the Al-Qaeda group members, since they target their opponents and support those elements which challenge Western interests, like the Shiite Houthis in Yemen, Shiite militias in Iraq, and certain elements in Afghanistan are supported by the Iranian regime. It turns out that while the United States and the free world focus their counterterrorism efforts on Al-Qaeda, Israel confronts mainly the Iranian-led group, which, unlike Al-Qaeda affiliates, enjoys the full support of two capable and dangerous state sponsors, Iran and Syria, who provide their proxies with capabilities that are far more than what was usually considered as common weapons of terror groups. Hezbollah, Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad are the arms of terror against Israel. The body is in Syria, and the head is the Iranian regime. This is another reason why this non-conventional regime should not have non-conventional capabilities, namely military nuclear capability. The Iranian regime might use the military nuclear capability as an umbrella to intensify its terror attacks and for producing dirty bomb for proxies. While each one of us focuses on its area of operation, we have to remember that these are two complementary parts of the same effort to secure the free world from the dangerous and ruthless attempt of the jihadists to change the world order. We have to be aware that in some of the cases, especially when it comes to the Iranian effort to acquire the potential to have military nuclear capability, we have to work together with the support of the international community to prevent this danger from materializing. Since 1973, the terror threat has become the major way of action of our opponents. Realizing that they cannot beat us in the conventional battlefield, even if they enjoy full surprise, they were deterred from launching another conventional war. Whereas the Egyptians and later the Jordanians drew the lessons that they will be better off by signing peace agreements with us, the radical and turbulent elements in the Middle East decided to focus on terror, identifying the Israeli society as the weak link in the Israeli posture. They thought that because the Israeli society is becoming wealthier and more individualistic, it is losing its willpower to sacrifice for a cause that is disputed among its members. Since the logic behind terrorism is not only to cause maximum damage and casualties to the civilian population of their adversary, but mainly break the willingness of the targeted society to fight, so weakening its stamina and delegitimizing its narrative, they believed they found a better way to reach their goals. Obviously, terror is not a spontaneous act. It is a product of a political decision at the highest levels and a systematic indoctrination, and usually its implementation is made possible through well-organized systems that enjoy the support of state sponsors like Iran and Syria, as I mentioned. Such a system and such indoctrination enabled the terror against Israel reach new peaks. The basic logic of terror has not changed much through the years, but the form of the terror against Israel has changed constantly. This was driven by four main sorts of reasons. The first reason political developments like the peace agreement, the Iranian Revolution, and the establishment of the Palestinian Authority following the Oslo Agreement. The second reason is the readiness of Israel to allow changes in the situation on the ground in a way that was perceived and presented as succumbing in front of terror, like the Israeli withdrawal from Lebanon and the disengagement from Gaza. The third reason, Israeli military successes, such as the confrontation with the terror emanating since 2000 from areas controlled by the Palestinian Authority in Judea and Samaria, defensive shield operation, or the show of force in the Second Lebanon War, and Operation Castled in Gaza. And the fourth reason, a constant learning and adjustment of the terror organizations and their patrons to the changing environment in which they were functioning, including adaptation to the proliferation of ungoverned territories, new technological capabilities, new communication systems, and new mass media opportunities. Beginning in the 80s, following the Islamic Revolution in Iran, the ousting of the Soviets from Afghanistan, and the corrupt nature of the Palestinian Authority under Chairman Arafat, these changes were manifested in the shift of the center of gravity of the terror from nationalistically motivated groups to radical jihad elements, both Shiites and Sunnis. This trend was accompanied by a considerable emphasis on homicide, suicide bombing, driven by the distorted interpretation given by radical Islamic clerics to the idea of istishhad, martyrdom. In recent years, following the Israeli withdrawals and achievements, the characteristics of the terror threat Israel faces continue to change significantly. The main features of this threat today are: the first one, the terror organizations are going through a process of institutionalization. Each one of the main terror groups is becoming more deeply involved with running a state-like system and taking upon itself police-like missions in the areas under its control, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, and so forth. Moreover, the Iran military-like organizations on top of their terror arms. The second feature, the direct daily friction between the terror organizations that preach for using terror and Israeli targets is minimal or totally absent, as we have less Palestinian workers inside Israel. The third feature, the involvement of the patrons of the terror organizations, mainly Iran and Syria, in supporting them with weapons, training, money, intelligence, and political assistance has grown considerably. The fourth feature, the terror organizations were clearly deterred from launching a new terror campaign against Israel after defensive shield operation, the Second Lebanon War, and Operation Castled in the Gaza Strip. They focus, therefore, on acquiring more weapons and preparing themselves for another round. They do this while taking advantage of the insufficient interference of regional and international elements that are supposed to prevent that from happening. The fifth feature, due to all of the above, their main weapon has become the longer-range rockets and missiles that are supposed to reach population centers in the heart of Israel instead of the suicide bomber. In countering these terrorist threats, we must answer two questions. First, is it possible to reach a decisive conclusion to terror? To this I answer affirmatively, yes. It is possible to reach a decisive conclusion to the threat of terrorism. We must therefore ask second question, how do we achieve this conclusion? What should we do to address the new features of the threat? On the policy and strategy level, we have to realize that, first of all, capitulation to terror only begets more terror. This is a well-known lesson we have learned from our withdrawals. Under no circumstances should we surrender to terror. The second principle, we should insist on full and irreversible giving up of the terror option as a condition for progress towards a political settlement in what is called the peace process. Such irreversible attitude requires what we call a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down one, namely changing the education messages to support peace and refraining from incitement to violence and hatred, fighting against terror, building reliable institutions, preserving law and order, and developing an uncorrupt economy. Without these changes, any agreement is just a temporary ceasefire, or hudna, as they call it, used by the terror groups to rearm. Is it possible? I'm not sure. We should encourage those who are ready to embark on this process and fight those who refuse to. But we shouldn't be misled by superficial moves and make sure that this attitude is for real. This, of course, is beside our expectations from a peace agreement that include, among other things, recognition in Israel's right to enjoy peace within secure, recognized and defensible borders as a nation-state of the Jewish people. Is it achievable? I'm not sure. The third feature, the third principle, deterrence against terror organizations has to be maintained. We should make it clear that we can and will respond very strongly to any attempt to harm us through the use of terror or rockets. We have to adhere to the notion that the best defense is a good offense. The fourth principle, an effort to prevent the arming of the terror groups with better weapons and to develop ways and means to protect the Israeli population from these weapons. The fifth principle, strengthening the social solidarity, the national resilience, and the public confidence in the justice of our cause. When terrorists cause physical and psychological damage to the civilian population, public resolve is almost as important as having military superiority. To promote such resilience, we, as a leadership, have to convince the public that terror can be overcome and that it should be fought until it is defeated, even if success will take time and sacrifice, and an education system that builds a national resolve, asserts the national narrative, and promotes a national vision. The sixth principle, maintain the moral high ground and fight for legitimacy. We have to continue to make sure that our counter-terrorist operations are designed to keep the civilians on both sides as far from the conflict as humanly possible. As long as we do so, we should not be affected by baseless, biased, and intentionally anti-Israeli papers like the Goldstone Committee report. I'd like to elaborate on this issue. The Goldstone report is the most evident example of the new blood libels, whose purpose is to deprive Israel from the ability to defend itself on the military, the legal, and the diplomatic arenas. As a former Chief of General Staff of the IDF, I can assure you that the Israeli Armed Forces Code of Conduct and its values are based on the principle of sanctity of life and require our soldiers to refrain from harming civilians as much as possible, even during fierce fighting. Our enemies, the terror organizations, take advantage of that, and while they launch the rockets and carry out terror attacks deliberately in order to murder our civilians, they hide behind their civil population, whom they use as human shields. Yet, we have to wage this legitimacy campaign not only to defend ourselves, but to defend the rest of the free world against the attempt of jihadi Islam to change the world order by turning any military move against them into a war crime, especially in the Israeli case. Anyhow, in spite of these attempts, Israel will do whatever is necessary to defend itself. We just do not have any other choice. And now the seventh principle: constant reassessment and learning of the developing situation in order to keep being relevant to the changing and new challenges, prepare for new threats, and identify opportunities. The only constant in counter-terrorism is a change. And the last principle, and not least, maximize the cooperation with our partners in this confrontation in international and regional arenas, as well as with moderate elements within the societies around us, as we do. Here I'd like to say a few words about hearts and minds. There is ongoing struggle within Islamic societies all over the world between jihadists and pragmatists, or we might call it radical Islamists versus moderates. We might describe it as an internal conflict between those who believe that happiness is achievable only in the next world and only by being shaheed, martyr, being killed for the sake of Allah, for God, and those who believe that happiness is achievable in our world. The free world should approach the pragmatist elements in those societies in order to enhance them by education, financial support, and political empowerment. In order to make it, radical Islamist elements, anyhow, should be defeated. There is no way to defeat such ideology, neither by appeasement nor by concessions. And here I would like to deal with the hearts and minds among the free world like-minded people. The main internal challenge among the free world's like-minded people, as well as leaders, is the lack of clarity. Unfortunately, Western like-minded people are ready to be manipulated and deceived when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Many misconceptions are dominated the international as well as the international political as well as public discourses. Like, for example, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a cause for instability in the Middle East. It's a misconception, no doubt about it. We claim that the Iranian Revolution didn't occur because of us. People are killed in Iraq without any connection to the State of Israel. The situation in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, is not because of us. The internal struggle in Algeria or in Lebanon, not because of us, but there are those who believe that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a cause for instability in the region. Another notion, misconception, is that because of this conflict, Muslims hate the West. And the third misconception is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a territorial one, and it can be solved easily, or in 1 year, or in 2 years' time, by territorial compromise. All those and many other misconceptions, unfortunately, are dominating the international public and political discourses, which actually serves those who try to delegitimize Israel by these false assumptions, misconceptions. I claim that that lack of moral clarity, and as a result of it, lack of clear strategy on the Western side, on the free world side, the confusion is a formidable challenge for those who really have to defeat radical Islam. If the diagnosis is wrong, what will be with the prognosis? To conclude, in order to meet the challenge of radical Islam And in order to be victorious in this conflict, the free world's parties have to demonstrate resilience, endurance, as well as political stomach, willingness and determination to defeat this threatening ideology. As there is neither swift victory nor instant solution, we should be patient and we have to operate according to a long-run strategy. Terror and radical Islam can and should be defeated. I believe that if we stick to these principles, we can win the complicated and demanding war against terror and radical Islam for the sake of the free world. Thank you.
Thank you, General Yalon. We now